This is TWiT.
This one, a little philosophical. Another Andy Ihnatko original. Well, not the story, but the link that he sent to me. And it's such a good, fun, weird topic. There's a documentary called Roadrunner, which is about the celebrity chef Anthony Bourdain. And he committed suicide. And it's sort of the people involved in his show and people who knew him writing or doing a documentary about him, including dealing with the fact that he committed suicide. And it uses clips. He was in so many shows that it uses a lot of clips of his voice to tell the story. However, there were things that he had written that he never said that anyone can recall on tape. And so what the documentarians decided to do was use an AI voice training system trained on his previous recorded words to generate Anthony Bourdain's voice narrating portions of the documentary with words that he wrote but never said out loud. And this, now I've read some unflattering stories about this documentary saying that it's actually kind of weird and elides some of his personal history, and that the more you see it, the more kind of questionable it is that it was even made. But I haven't seen it. I don't even know. I don't really want to talk about the documentary itself as much as this idea that Andy sent to me about, is it, like, it's his words, right? But he never said them out loud. So what is, and I'll grant you, 3 decades ago, we had video of Fred Astaire dancing with a vacuum cleaner on a Super Bowl ad. So it's not as if this sort of thing hasn't happened before. But at this point, the technology exists with AI. There's a company called Descript that makes an audio editing tool that if you feed it enough audio of a human being, it will let you type anything you want, and you can get that person's voice to say it. And we've seen this before. Roger Ebert had a Ebert-esque voice built for him that he decided he didn't want to use. And here we have a case where Anthony Bourdain cannot speak for himself. He's no longer with us. It sounds like perhaps some of the people closest to him were not consulted on this, and yet here's his voice that's being made to say things that he did write, but that he never actually said. It is a real weird 21st century ethical conundrum. So Andy, thank you for recommending this to me. I feel like you have strong feelings about this. That's just my guess.
Yeah, it just has so many different layers to it. Well, first of all, in the context of a documentary, it's unnecessary and it's really damaging, because you yourself brought up that Val Kilmer has a documentary because of his throat cancer. His speech is very much compromised. So for a lot of the narration that's in, quote, his voice, he and the filmmakers cast someone to represent his voice. Roger
Ebert kind of sounds
did
like him, but is not him.
Exactly. Yeah. Roger Ebert did the exact same thing when his memoir, while he was alive, was produced into a movie. He chose a voice artist. He's actually also a voice artist who does a lot of the Empire villains in a lot of the Star Wars games. But he got to choose who's going to represent his voice. Anthony Bourdain did not have a say in this, as you say. But in the context of a documentary, when you find that one thing has been faked, it ruins your perceptions of everything else. This is my problem with Michael Moore documentaries, that you will watch it and then you'll say, wait a minute, that's totally not true. I know for a fact that's not true. And then no matter how positive or humanist this whole story is, I can't trust anything that's being said in this documentary. So if the filmmaker chose not to simply have somebody, not even necessarily a sound-alike, but someone who has a compatible voice, read this email. I think it's a 40-second email to a friend. It really interferes with how you start to go with this. But outside of a documentary, it really is very, very interesting. I'm sure that the reason why Fred Astaire was able to be likeness was able to have a vacuum cleaner in his hand, dancing up and down the steps from one of his famous clips from, I think it was from the Barclays at Broadway, but I could be wrong with that, is because he was a big celebrity. He had really good lawyers, and part of his estate was he made the decisions that, well, after I die, is it okay to use my likeness and films of my movies in advertising? And he signed off on that. Maybe he didn't anticipate how it could be used, but he did think about it. He could have said no. he decided to say yes. So I think that now we're going to have this extra element where people are going to, where celebrities are going to say, I do not give my, if I don't want my voice to be recreated, if I don't want my likeness to be recreated, then that's going to be in their wills. But let's go into something a little bit more personal. This is, I'm going to cut. I swear to God, I've got a shot clock in my head because this could be like 2 hours of conversation between the three of us. But for the past couple of years, I've been thinking about how technology plays a role in the grieving process when we lose a loved one. That we've all now been to funerals in which there is always that little HD TV on the table that has a slideshow of all kinds of different pieces of video and photos that were collected over the course of this person's life, and helps us to remember who they were. But imagine a little step in the future. As you said, we do have this technology where if you have enough samples of someone's voice, you can recreate that voice. What if, for certain people, they decided that it would help them with their grieving process if they could have the emails that your mom or your dad sent to you read in their voice, with a synthetic voice that they create? Or even, and this is going to sound really creepy, but again, people grieve in their own ways. What if you decided that I want to have, I don't want to have my smart speaker speak in my dead mother's voice, but I want a voice that reminds me of my mother, that maybe a voice that maybe has grew up in the same neighborhood as my mother. What does that become the sort of technology where it is helpful and healing, or is that just so creepy we want no part of that forever and ever? These are questions that we're going to have to start asking ourselves. I mean, we are in a society where it is part of our grieving tradition to have the body of a loved one on display for a couple of days in a funeral home. That in itself could seem pretty weird. It might seem less weird than, my favorite book. My dad read The Hobbit to me, like as a little kid when I used to go to bed. I want to hear my father's voice reading The Hobbit to me from start to finish. That if technology like this could be used for something like that, maybe it doesn't matter that the deceased person didn't get a choice in the matter, because on some level they're no longer here, and because these products are not being used in a public fashion, maybe that's a situation in which we can sort of overlook the fact that we didn't get consent from the living.
I will commend to everybody, by the way, the Black Mirror episode Be Right Back, which is about a version of this, what Andy just described, and is again, philosophically, there are lots of questions here about what do you have the right to do. I think it's interesting, like if Val Kilmer wanted an AI reconstruction of his voice to narrate his movie, because he's alive, he could choose that, and he chose not to. Anthony Bourdain doesn't get that choice, but this is a 21st century choice that didn't exist before, that for all that Roger Ebert went through, trying to find a synthetic voice based on all of his hours of audio, he wasn't satisfied with it. I suspect that today they could make a pretty immaculate Roger Ebert voice for him, but he isn't here anymore, and so we probably shouldn't do that, even though it would be great to hear him reading his essays, because he's no longer here.
I should say, I believe that the Bourdain estate did sign off on this, which, well, that doesn't mean I like it. That does mean something. But an even more important fact is that the only reason we're discussing this at all is because a writer for The New Yorker named Helen Rosner was writing about the documentary and saw it and wondered to herself, why do they have audio of Anthony Bourdain reading his email? It's really weird they would have that. So she asked them, and Morgan Neville, who's a really good documentarian who made this, acknowledged that they did that in several instances, but he did not disclose it, and he seemed, I have to say, a little bit flippant in his response to her. He kind of said, there are other places where we did this, but you're not going to be able to tell what they are, and maybe someday we can have this debate, but I'm not going to have a debate about the ethics
while I'm promoting my movie
here and now.
And Bourdain's ex-wife said that she didn't give permission, but she's probably not the one who's involved with the estate who's giving permission.
Yeah. And that really bothers me. If it had started with a title saying some of Anthony Bourdain's dialogue in this was recreated, I think it would be a radically different situation than what they painted themselves into.
The disclosure
by not being upfront about it.
And that gets to Andy's point about trust of the information that you're seeing in a documentary, even if you just put up a super title that said, this is a reconstruction of his voice that you're hearing reading this. You might have the reaction of, this is amazing. We get to hear his voice reading his words. But instead, it's just a little bit weird. I'm not saying this is a scandal either. I just am saying that it gives one pause about the capabilities that we have to do things like this. Yeah. And I think that's interesting. I mentioned Descript earlier. The idea with Descript is, if you're working for a very popular, famous podcast, let's say This Week in Tech with Leo, you could get Leo to speak all of the words into Descript that it wants. And then when Leo goes on vacation, he doesn't even have to pre-tape the ads. Or what if one ad changed after he already left? Then somebody here could retype that part and output it as audio, and it would sound like Leo said it. And that's why that product exists. So it's generally, the idea is that it's with the approval of the person. It's like a very busy correspondent is not around, and you need one slight wording change in the piece before you lock it. Yeah. But still, when I first saw that feature, I could not believe it.
Yeah, and since you brought it up, Andrew Mason actually put up a blog post on Friday addressing this exact thing. After a couple paragraphs, said, for what it's worth, here's our take. Unapproved voice cloning is a slippery slope. As soon as you get into a world where you're making subjective judgment calls about whether specific cases can be ethical, it won't be long before anything goes. Even if you think that the use in the Bourdain documentary is ethical, is there enough upside to open this Pandora's box? We think the answer is no. Whatever the path may be to universal enlightenment, we can get there without reanimating the dead.
Whew.